Marcus Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed the narrow stairs to his office. The old building creaked under his feet with every step. The smell of soap and detergent from the laundromat below filled the air. It was not the kind of place where successful lawyers worked, but it was all Marcus could afford. His office was small and cramped. The paint on the walls was old and starting to peel. There was one small window that looked out at the busy street below. Cars honked their horns. People walked quickly on the sidewalk. The city never stopped moving. Marcus sat down at his old wooden desk. The chair squeaked when he moved. On his desk were stacks of papers and files. Each file was a case. Each case was someone who needed help. Most of the big law firms would not take these cases. They were not worth enough money. He opened the first file. It was about Mrs. Garcia. She was an old woman who worked as a cleaner in an office building. Her boss had not paid her for 3 months. She had 5 grandchildren to feed. The boss said she was too slow and did not deserve the money. Marcus knew this was wrong. Everyone deserved to be paid for their work. The second file was about Tom Wilson. He was a construction worker who got hurt on the job. A heavy beam fell on his leg. Now he could not walk properly. The construction company said it was his fault. They would not pay for his medical bills. Tom's wife was pregnant. They needed the money badly. Marcus looked at more files. There was Sofia Martinez, a young mother who came to America 5 years ago. She worked in a restaurant kitchen. The owner made her work 16 hours a day but only paid her for 8. When she complained, he threatened to call immigration on her. She was scared but needed someone to fight for her. Each story made Marcus feel angry and sad at the same time. These were good people. They worked hard. They followed the rules. But powerful people took advantage of them. They thought poor people could not fight back. Marcus wanted to prove them wrong. He had graduated from law school 3 years ago. He had been the best student in his class at State University. His grades were perfect. His professors said he had a bright future. But Marcus did not have the right connections. He did not have rich parents. He did not belong to fancy clubs. The big law firms were not interested in him. After graduation, Marcus had tried to get a job at several big firms. He wore his best suit to every interview. It was the only suit he owned. His mother had bought it for him when he graduated. She had saved money for months to afford it. The suit was not expensive, but it was clean and neat. The lawyers at the big firms looked at him with cold eyes. They asked about his family background. They wanted to know which law school he attended. When he said State University, their faces changed. It was not Harvard or Yale. It was not good enough for them. They said they would call him back. They never did. Marcus remembered his first day in this small office. He had used all his savings to pay the first month's rent. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, was kind. He knew Marcus was just starting out. He agreed to let Marcus pay the rent late if needed. Not many landlords would do that. The first client was Mrs. Johnson. She was a single mother with 2 young children. Her boss at the grocery store had fired her for no good reason. She could not pay her rent. She was about to lose her apartment. Marcus worked on her case for free. He spent weeks researching the law. He found out the boss had broken several rules. In the end, Mrs. Johnson got her job back and received money for the time she had missed work. Word spread slowly in the neighborhood. People started to trust Marcus. They saw that he cared about them. He did not ask for money up front. He did not look down on them because they were poor. He treated everyone with respect, but running a law practice was expensive. Marcus had to pay rent for the office. He needed money for supplies like paper, ink, and files. He had to pay for research tools and legal books. Some months, he barely had enough money to eat. He often worked late into the night, living on coffee and sandwiches. His law school friends had different lives. They worked at big firms in tall buildings. They wore expensive suits and drove fancy cars. They went to expensive restaurants and took vacations in other countries. Sometimes Marcus wondered if he had made the right choice. But then he would get a call from Mrs. Garcia. She would tell him that she finally got paid. Her grandchildren could eat dinner that night. Or Tom Wilson would stop by the office. His leg was getting better and the construction company had agreed to pay his medical bills. These moments made all the hard work worth it. Marcus looked at his bank account on his computer. There was $347. Rent was due in 2 weeks. It would cost $400. He needed to find a way to make more money soon. He could not help people if he lost his office. He picked up the phone and called Mrs. Martinez. She was the housekeeper who needed help with her case. Her employer, a rich family, had fired her without pay. They said she had stolen jewelry, but Marcus knew it was not true. Mrs. Martinez was honest and hardworking. The rich family just wanted an excuse not to pay her. Mrs. Martinez, this is Marcus Rodriguez. I have good news about your case. I found some laws that can help us. The family cannot fire you without proof. They also have to pay you for all the work you did. Mrs. Martinez started to cry on the phone. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I was so scared I did not know what to do. My children need food and clothes for school. Don't worry, Mrs. Martinez. We will fight this together. I will make sure you get what you deserve. After he hung up the phone, Marcus felt better. This was why he became a lawyer. Not for money or fame, but to help people who had nowhere else to turn. Tomorrow he would go to court and fight for Mrs. Martinez. He would show the world that poor people deserved justice too. Marcus stayed in his office until late that night, preparing for the case. The city grew quiet outside his window. The laundromat below had closed hours ago, but Marcus kept working. He had a job to do and he would not give up. Judge Harrison Blackwell looked at himself in the mirror of his private bathroom. His black robe hung perfectly on his tall frame. His gray hair was combed back neatly. His face was stern and serious. This was how a judge should look, he thought, to himself. Powerful. Important. In control. He walked through his large chambers. The room was filled with expensive furniture. Dark wood bookcases lined the walls. They were filled with leather-bound law books that he rarely read anymore. A large painting of himself hung behind his desk. In the painting, he looked noble and wise. It had cost him $5,000, but it was worth every penny. Judge Blackwell had been on the bench for 20 years. When he first became a judge, he had wanted to serve justice fairly. He believed in the law. He thought he could make a difference in people's lives. But that was a long time ago. Things had changed. He had changed. The change started slowly. A wealthy lawyer named Richard Sterling came to see him about a case. Sterling represented a big company that was being sued by workers. The workers said the company had made them sick with dangerous chemicals. Sterling wanted Judge Blackwell to rule in favor of the company. "Judge, I know you're a fair man," Sterling had said with a smile. "But sometimes fair doesn't pay the bills. My client would be grateful for your understanding, very grateful." Sterling left an envelope on the judge's desk. Inside was $10,000 in cash. Judge Blackwell stared at the money for a long time. His salary as a judge was good, but it wasn't great. His wife wanted a bigger house. His children needed money for college. The money in the envelope could solve many problems. That night, Judge Blackwell went home to his small house. It was nice, but not as nice as the houses his wealthy friends lived in. His wife, Margaret, was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked tired and worried. "Harrison, we got another letter from the bank today," she said without looking up from the stove. "They want to know when we can pay the rest of Tommy's college tuition. We're already 3 months behind." Judge Blackwell thought about the envelope. In his office, $10,000 would pay for college and much more. The next day, he ruled in favor of Sterling's client. The workers lost their case. They would never get money for their medical bills. But Judge Blackwell's problems were solved. After that first time, it became easier. More lawyers came to him, with envelopes full of money. Real estate developers wanted him to approve their projects. Insurance companies wanted him to deny claims from accident victims. Rich people wanted him to help them avoid paying taxes or going to jail for their crimes. Judge Blackwell's life changed quickly. He moved his family to a mansion in the best part of town. The house had 8 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and a swimming pool. His wife was happy. She could finally shop at expensive stores and go to fancy parties with other rich wives. His children, Tommy and Sarah, went to the most expensive private schools in the state. They had the best clothes, the newest computers, and took vacations to Europe every summer. They never had to worry about money. They thought their father was successful because he was smart and hardworking. Judge Blackwell bought expensive cars. He had a BMW for driving to work and a Mercedes for special occasions. He joined the country club where all the important people in town spent their time. He played golf with mayors, business owners, and other judges. They respected him because he had power and money, but the money came with a price. Judge Blackwell had to be careful about which cases he took. He had to make sure the right people won and the wrong people lost. He became very good at making his corrupt decisions look legal and fair. When poor people came to his court, he treated them badly. He would interrupt their lawyers. He would ask confusing questions. He would make them feel stupid and unwelcome. He wanted them to know that his courtroom was not for people like them. Rich people and their lawyers received very different treatment. Judge Blackwell would listen carefully to their arguments. He would nod and smile. He would ask easy questions that helped them make their points. He made sure they felt comfortable and respected in his courtroom. Other judges in the courthouse knew something was wrong, but they never said anything. Judge Blackwell was powerful. He had friends in high places. He could make life difficult for anyone who caused trouble for him. It was easier to look the other way and pretend nothing was happening. The court staff also stayed quiet. The bailiffs, the clerks, and the court reporters all saw what was happening. They watched rich lawyers come and go from the judges' chambers. They saw how differently he treated rich and poor people. But they needed their jobs. Speaking up could mean losing everything. Judge Blackwell had a system for receiving bribes. Lawyers would make appointments to see him in his chambers. They would bring briefcases or envelopes. Sometimes the money was hidden inside legal documents. Other times, lawyers would make large donations to fake charities that Judge Blackwell controlled. The money always found its way to his personal bank accounts. He was smart about hiding his wealth. He put money in banks in other states. He bought expensive things slowly over time, so people wouldn't notice sudden changes. He told people that his wife had inherited money from her family, or that he had made good investments in the stock market. Over the years, Judge Blackwell became colder and meaner. He enjoyed having power over people's lives. He liked watching poor people struggle. While rich people got everything they wanted, he felt like he was smarter than everyone else because he had figured out how to use his position to get rich. At the country club, he would tell stories about the poor people who came to his court. He would make fun of their cheap clothes and broken English. He would laugh about how he had ruled against them. The other rich men would laugh too. They thought poor people deserved whatever bad things happened to them. Judge Blackwell's wife and children never asked where the money came from. They enjoyed their comfortable life too much to care about how he paid for it. They assumed he deserved everything he had because he was important and successful. But late at night, when Judge Blackwell was alone in his big house, sometimes he felt uncomfortable. He remembered the young judge he used to be. That man had believed in justice and fairness. That man had wanted to help people, not hurt them. Sometimes Judge Blackwell wondered what that young man would think of what he had become. But morning always came, and with it came more opportunities to make money. Judge Blackwell would put on his expensive suit, drive his luxury car to the courthouse, and put on his black robe. Then he would sit on his bench and decide which people would win and which people would lose. And his decision always depended on who had paid him the most money. Judge Blackwell thought he was untouchable. He had been doing this for so many years without getting caught. He had powerful friends who protected him. He believed he was too smart and too careful to ever face consequences for his actions. He had no idea that his perfect system was about to be destroyed by a poor lawyer in a cheap suit. Marcus Rodriguez walked up the steps of the courthouse carrying his old briefcase. Inside were all the papers for Mrs. Rosa Martinez's case. She was a housekeeper who had worked for the wealthy Pemberton family for 2 years. They had fired her suddenly and refused to pay her last month's wages. They claimed she had stolen the expensive necklace, but Marcus knew it was a lie. Mrs. Martinez was an honest woman. She had 3 children and worked 2 jobs to support them. She cleaned houses, during the day and worked at a restaurant at night. She never missed a day of work. She never complained, even when the Pembertons made her work extra hours without pay. The real reason they fired her was simple. Mrs. Martinez had asked for a small raise. She needed more money because her youngest son needed medicine for his asthma. The Pembertons were angry that a housekeeper would dare ask for more money, so they made up the story about the stolen necklace and fired her. Marcus had spent weeks preparing for this case. He had gathered evidence that proved Mrs. Martinez was innocent. He had photos showing that the necklace was still in Mrs. Pemberton's jewelry box after Mrs. Martinez was fired. He had witness statements from neighbors who saw Mrs. Martinez working hard and honestly. He had records showing that Mrs. Martinez had never been accused of stealing anything before. As Marcus entered the courthouse, he felt nervous but confident. The facts were on his side. The law was clear. Workers had the right to be paid for their work. Employers could not make false accusations to avoid paying wages. Any fair judge would rule in favor of Mrs. Martinez. But Marcus did not know that this case would be heard by Judge Harrison Blackwell. He had never appeared before this judge before. He had heard stories about Judge Blackwell being tough but fair. Marcus hoped the stories were true. The courtroom was large and impressive. High ceilings and dark wood made everything look serious and important. Judge Blackwell's bench was raised high above everyone else. It made him look powerful and intimidating. Marcus took his seat at the lawyer's table and organized his papers. The Pembertons sat in the front row with their lawyer, James Morrison. Morrison worked for one of the biggest law firms in the city. He wore a suit that cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. His shoes were shiny and expensive. His briefcase was made of real leather. Everything about him screamed money and power. Mrs. Martinez sat behind Marcus. She wore her best dress, but it was old and had been repaired several times. She looked scared and out of place in the fancy courtroom. Her hands shook as she watched the important people around her. Marcus turned and gave her an encouraging smile. "Don't worry, Mrs. Martinez," he whispered. "We have the truth on our side. Everything will be okay." Judge Blackwell entered the courtroom. Everyone stood up as he walked to his bench. His black robe flowed behind him like a cape. He looked stern and serious. When he sat down, everyone else sat down too. The bailiff announced the case. Martinez versus Pemberton, claim for unpaid wages and wrongful termination. Judge Blackwell looked down at Marcus with cold eyes. He noticed Marcus's cheap suit immediately. The fabric was thin and the cut was poor. The suit had been pressed, but it still looked old and worn. Marcus's shoes were polished but scuffed from years of wear. His briefcase was falling apart at the corners. Then Judge Blackwell looked at James Morrison. Morrison's suit was perfect. His tie was silk. His watch was gold. Everything about him suggested success and importance. Judge Blackwell smiled slightly when he looked at Morrison. These were the kind of people who belonged in his courtroom. "Mr. Rodriguez," Judge Blackwell said, his voice cold and mocking. "I see you're representing the plaintiff today. Tell me, where did you go to law school?" Marcus stood up. "State University, Your Honor. I graduated with highest honors." Judge Blackwell laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "State University, how interesting. And how long have you been practicing law, Mr. Rodriguez?" 3 years, Your Honor." 3 whole years, Judge Blackwell said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, aren't we impressive? And tell me, Mr. Rodriguez, how many cases have you won? In my courtroom?" Marcus felt confused by the question. "This is my first time appearing before you, Your Honor." "Your first time? Well, that explains a lot." Judge Blackwell looked at Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, I see you're representing the defendants. Harvard Law School, I assume?" Morrison stood up with confidence. "Yes, Your Honor, class of 1995. "Excellent. A real lawyer. Please proceed with your opening statement." Marcus felt his face get hot. Judge Blackwell was treating him like he didn't belong in the courtroom. But Marcus pushed down his anger. He needed to focus on Mrs. Martinez's case. Morrison gave his opening statement. He spoke smoothly and confidently. He painted Mrs. Martinez as a dishonest woman who had betrayed the trust of a good family. He said she had stolen valuable jewelry and was now lying to get money she didn't deserve. He made it sound like Mrs. Martinez was the criminal and the Pembertons were the victims. When Morrison finished, Judge Blackwell nodded approvingly. "Very well presented, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Rodriguez, you may proceed with your opening statement." Marcus stood up and began to speak. He explained that Mrs. Martinez was a hard-working mother who had been falsely accused. He said the evidence would show that she had never stolen anything. He was about to present his evidence when Judge Blackwell interrupted him. "Mr. Rodriguez, is that suit the only one you own?" The question hit Marcus like a slap in the face. The entire courtroom was silent. Everyone was staring at him. Mrs. Martinez looked confused and embarrassed. Morrison smirked and tried to hide his laughter. "Your Honor, I don't understand how my clothing is relevant to this case," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Well, if you're going to appear in my courtroom, you should at least look like a professional. That suit looks like you bought it at a discount store, did you?" Marcus felt his cheeks burning with shame and anger. "Your Honor, I believe we should focus on the facts of the case, not on personal appearance." Judge Blackwell's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't tell me what we should focus on, Mr. Rodriguez. I run this courtroom, not you. And frankly, your appearance suggests that you don't take this court seriously. How can I trust that you've prepared properly for this case when you can't even dress properly for it?" Mrs. Martinez looked like she wanted to disappear. She had saved money for months to hire Marcus. Now the judge was making fun of him in front of everyone. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Marcus took a deep breath. He knew he had to be careful. Making the judge angry would only hurt Mrs. Martinez's case. "Your Honor, I apologize if my appearance has offended you. I assure you that I have prepared thoroughly for this case. I have compelling evidence that will prove my client's innocence." "Compelling evidence?" Judge Blackwell laughed again. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've been a judge for 20 years. I've seen real lawyers present real evidence. What makes you think that someone from a discount law school can compete with a Harvard graduate like Mr. Morrison?" The insults kept coming. Judge Blackwell made fun of Marcus's education, his experience, and his appearance. He suggested that Marcus should find a different career because he clearly wasn't qualified to practice law. He said that poor people like Mrs. Martinez should save their money instead of wasting it on cheap lawyers. Morrison watched with satisfaction. He knew Judge Blackwell well. The judge always favored wealthy clients and their expensive lawyers. This case would be easy to win. Marcus tried several times to present his evidence, but Judge Blackwell kept interrupting him with more insults and jokes. The judge made it clear that he had already decided who would win the case, and it wasn't going to be the poor housekeeper and her bargain lawyer. Finally, Marcus could not take it anymore. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I object to this treatment. My client deserves a fair hearing regardless of my background or appearance. The law requires that you consider the evidence impartially." Judge Blackwell's face turned red with anger. "How dare you lecture me about the law? You're nothing but a cheap lawyer in a cheap suit representing cheap people. Don't you ever tell me how to run my courtroom again, or I'll hold you in contempt of court." The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Marcus realized that he had no chance of getting a fair hearing from this judge. Judge Blackwell had made up his mind before hearing any evidence. Mrs. Martinez would lose her case not because she was wrong, but because she was poor and powerless. Marcus looked back at Mrs. Martinez. Tears were running down her face. She had trusted him to help her, and now she was watching him be humiliated in front of everyone. Marcus felt like he had failed her completely. Judge Blackwell ruled against Mrs. Martinez without properly considering any evidence. He said she had failed to prove her case and ordered her to pay the Pembertons' legal fees. Mrs. Martinez would not only lose her wages, but she would also owe thousands of dollars to the people who had wronged her. As they left the courtroom, Mrs. Martinez was crying. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez, this is all my fault. I should have just accepted what happened and moved on." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. "No, Mrs. Martinez, this isn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. The system failed you today, but that doesn't mean you should give up fighting for what's right." The news of Marcus Rodriguez's humiliation in Judge Blackwell's courtroom spread through the legal community like wildfire. Lawyers talked about it at lunch meetings. Court clerks whispered about it in the hallways. Legal secretaries shared the story over coffee breaks. Everyone had heard about the poor lawyer who got destroyed by Judge Blackwell. James Morrison, the Pemberton's lawyer, made sure the story got around. At the exclusive downtown law club, he told the tale with great pleasure. He acted out Marcus's confused responses to the judge's insults. He imitated Marcus's cheap suit and nervous manner. The other wealthy lawyers laughed until their sides hurt. "You should have seen this guy," Morrison said, swirling his expensive whiskey. "He looked like he bought his suit at a thrift store. Judge Blackwell absolutely destroyed him. It was beautiful to watch." The other lawyers nodded and smiled. They all knew Judge Blackwell's reputation. He didn't like poor lawyers who didn't know their place. He preferred working with people from good families and expensive law schools. It kept the legal system running smoothly. Back at his small office above the laundromat, Marcus tried to focus on his other cases, but it was hard to concentrate. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear Judge Blackwell's mocking laughter. He could see the judge's cold smile as he made fun of his education and appearance. Mrs. Martinez had stopped returning Marcus's phone calls. He didn't blame her. She had trusted him to help her, and he had let her down completely. Now she owed money to the people who had cheated her. Her situation was worse than before she hired him. Marcus's other clients started to worry. They had heard about what happened in court. If Marcus couldn't handle a simple wage case, how could he help them with their problems? Some of them called to cancel their appointments. Others just stopped showing up. 3 days after the court hearing, Marcus got a call from David Chen. David was a taxi driver who had been hurt in a car accident. The other driver was drunk and had run a red light. It should have been an easy case to win. David's insurance company was supposed to pay for his medical bills and lost wages. "Mr. Rodriguez," David said on the phone, "I heard about what happened in court the other day. People are saying that Judge Blackwell made you look like a fool. Is that true?" Marcus felt his heart sink. "Mr. Chen, every case is different. What happened with Mrs. Martinez doesn't affect your case at all. I'm still the same lawyer who has been working hard for you." There was a long pause on the phone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez, but I think I need to find a different lawyer. I can't afford to lose this case. I have a family to support." After David hung up, Marcus put his head in his hands. This was exactly what he had been afraid of. His reputation was ruined. No one would trust him anymore. Judge Blackwell had not just won one case. He had destroyed Marcus's entire career with a few cruel words. The next morning, Marcus had to appear in court for another case. This time it was Judge Patricia Williams, who had always treated him fairly before. But when he walked into her courtroom, he could see that things had changed. Judge Williams looked at him with a mixture of pity and doubt. She had heard the stories about Judge Blackwell's courtroom. She wondered if Marcus really was as incompetent as people were saying. During the hearing, she interrupted him more often than usual. She questioned his legal arguments more carefully. She seemed to expect him to make mistakes. Marcus's client, an elderly man named Frank Thompson, noticed the difference too. After the hearing, Frank pulled Marcus aside in the hallway. "Son, what's going on?" Frank asked. "The judge seemed like she didn't trust you. Did something happen?" Marcus didn't know what to say. He couldn't tell Frank that another judge had publicly humiliated him. He couldn't explain that his reputation was ruined because he was poor and didn't have the right connections. Instead, he just said that everything was fine and that they would win the case. But they didn't win. Judge Williams ruled against them on a technical issue that she probably would have overlooked before. Frank was disappointed and confused. He had been counting on the money from this case to pay for his wife's cancer treatments. Word of Marcus's second loss spread quickly. People began to say that he was on a losing streak. Other lawyers started to avoid him. When he walked into the courthouse, conversations would stop. People would look at him with pity or disgust. He felt like everyone was talking about him behind his back. The worst part was that Marcus knew some of the gossip was unfair. Judge Williams' case had been close. He had made good arguments and presented solid evidence. But his reputation had influenced the judge's decision. People expected him to lose, so they looked for reasons to rule against him. At the country club, Judge Blackwell was enjoying his victory. He told the story of Marcus's humiliation to anyone who would listen. He painted it as a lesson about knowing your place in society. Poor people should not try to compete with their betters. The legal system worked best when everyone accepted their proper role. That Rodriguez fellow thought he could just walk into my courtroom and demand respect, Judge Blackwell said to the other club members. I showed him where poor lawyers belong. Hopefully, he learned his lesson. The wealthy men at the club agreed completely. They liked Judge Blackwell because he protected their interests. He made sure that their businesses didn't get sued successfully. He helped them avoid paying taxes or facing criminal charges. In return, they made sure he lived a comfortable life. Back in his office, Marcus was working late again. He was trying to prepare for his next case, but it was hard to stay motivated. He kept making mistakes in his legal research. His confidence was shaken. He second-guessed every decision he made. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Maria Santos, a young woman who cleaned offices at night. Her boss had been touching her inappropriately and making crude comments. When she complained, he fired her and refused to pay her final paycheck. She needed a lawyer to help her fight back. Mr. Rodriguez, I heard you help people like me, Maria said. People who don't have much money but need justice. Can you help me? Marcus wanted to say yes, but he hesitated. What if he lost this case too? What if Judge Blackwell or another hostile judge humiliated him again? Maria would be worse off than before, just like Mrs. Martinez. Miss Santos, I have to be honest with you, Marcus said. I've had some difficult cases recently. You might be better off with a different lawyer. Maria was quiet for a moment. Mr. Rodriguez, I can't afford the fancy lawyers. You're the only one who will even talk to me. Please, I really need your help. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about why he became a lawyer in the first place. It wasn't for money or fame. It was to help people who had nowhere else to turn. People like Maria Santos who worked hard but were taken advantage of by powerful people. Okay, Miss Santos, Marcus said finally. I'll help you. But I have to warn you that it won't be easy. Some judges don't like lawyers like me. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself in another courtroom facing another hostile judge. This time it was Judge Robert Maxwell, who was friends with Judge Blackwell. Judge Maxwell had heard all about the young lawyer who didn't know his place. The case should have been simple. Maria's boss had clearly broken several laws. There were witnesses who had seen him harassing her. There was security camera footage that supported her story. But Judge Maxwell didn't want to hear any of it. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Maxwell said with a cold smile, I hope you're better prepared today than you were in Judge Blackwell's courtroom. We don't have time for amateur performances. Marcus felt his face burning with shame again. He tried to present his evidence, but Judge Maxwell kept interrupting him with sarcastic comments. The judge made it clear that he had already decided against Maria before hearing the facts. In the end, Maria lost her case just like Mrs. Martinez. She not only didn't get her job back or her missing wages, but she was also ordered to pay legal fees to her former boss. She left the courtroom crying and defeated. After the hearing, Marcus sat alone in his car in the courthouse parking lot. He had lost 3 cases in a row, not because his clients were wrong, but because the judges had already decided against him. His reputation was destroyed, his confidence was gone. He was seriously thinking about giving up law completely. Marcus didn't know that someone had been watching his cases very carefully, someone who knew the truth about Judge Blackwell and the corrupt system he represented, someone who had been waiting for the right person to help her expose the truth. That person was about to change Marcus's life forever. The humiliation that Judge Blackwell had inflicted on Marcus was about to become the weapon that would destroy the corrupt judge's career. But Marcus didn't know that yet. All he knew was that he was a failure who couldn't help the people who needed him most. As Marcus drove home to his small apartment, he wondered if he should find a different career. Maybe Judge Blackwell was right. Maybe some people just weren't meant to be lawyers. Maybe poor people like him should accept their place in the world and stop trying to fight the system. But deep down, Marcus still believed in justice. He still wanted to help people who had nowhere else to turn. He just didn't know how to do it in a world where judges cared more about money and power then truth and fairness. That knowledge was coming soon, but for now, Sarah Chen had been working as a court reporter for 15 years. Every day she sat quietly in the corner of various courtrooms, typing every word that was spoken. Judges, lawyers, and witnesses often forgot she was there. To them, she was just part of the furniture, invisible and unimportant. But Sarah saw everything. She heard every word. She watched every gesture. And what she had been seeing in Judge Blackwell's courtroom for the past 5 years made her sick to her stomach. Sarah had grown up poor, just like Marcus Rodriguez. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. They worked in a restaurant, saving every penny so Sarah could go to college. She studied hard and became a court reporter because she believed in justice and wanted to be part of the legal system. When Sarah first started working in Judge Blackwell's courtroom, she thought he was strict but fair. He seemed to know the law well, and his decisions appeared reasonable. But slowly, she began to notice patterns that troubled her. Rich people and their expensive lawyers always seemed to win their cases even when the evidence was against them. Poor people and their cheap lawyers always seemed to lose, even when they had strong cases. At first, Sarah thought it was just coincidence. Maybe wealthy people really did hire better lawyers who prepared better cases. But then Sarah started paying closer attention. She noticed lawyers meeting privately with Judge Blackwell in his chambers. She saw envelopes and briefcases being exchanged. She heard conversations that were supposed to be private. And she realized that Judge Blackwell was selling justice to the highest bidder. The turning point for Sarah came 3 years ago. Her own daughter, Lisa, had been in a car accident. A drunk driver had run a red light and hit Lisa's car. Lisa was badly injured and spent 2 months in the hospital. The medical bills were enormous and Lisa couldn't work because of her injuries. The case should have been simple. The other driver was clearly at fault. He had been drinking at a bar for 4 hours before getting in his car. Several witnesses saw him run the red light. The police report supported Lisa's version of events, but the drunk driver's family was wealthy. They hired James Morrison, one of the most expensive lawyers in the city, and the case was assigned to Judge Blackwell's courtroom. Sarah had to excuse herself from working on her daughter's case because of the conflict of interest. But she watched from the gallery as Morrison presented his defense. He claimed that Lisa had been driving recklessly and was actually responsible for the accident. He had no evidence to support this claim, but he presented it confidently and smoothly. Lisa's lawyer was young and inexperienced. He had good evidence, but he was nervous and made several small mistakes during his presentation. Sarah watched in horror as Judge Blackwell treated Lisa's lawyer with obvious contempt while showing great respect to Morrison. In the end, Judge Blackwell ruled that the accident was Lisa's fault. Not only did Lisa not receive any money for her medical bills and lost wages, but she was also ordered to pay for the damage to the drunk driver's car. The ruling was so unfair that even other lawyers in the courthouse were shocked. That night, Sarah went home and cried for hours. Her daughter had been victimized twice, first by the drunk driver, and then by a corrupt judge who cared more about money than justice. Sarah felt helpless and angry, but she didn't know what to do about it. The next day, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She started secretly documenting Judge Blackwell's corrupt activities. She began keeping careful records of which cases he heard and how he ruled. She noted which lawyers met with him privately and which clients always seemed to win regardless of the evidence. Sarah was in a unique position to gather evidence. As a court reporter, she had access to all the case files and court records. She could see patterns that individual lawyers might miss. She could compare similar cases and see how differently they were handled, depending on who the parties were. Over the next 3 years, Sarah built an enormous file of evidence. She had photographs of lawyers entering and leaving Judge Blackwell's chambers with briefcases and envelopes. She had recordings of conversations where the judge discussed which way he planned to rule before hearing the evidence. She had financial records showing that Judge Blackwell's lifestyle far exceeded what he could afford on a judge's salary. Sarah was very careful about how she gathered this evidence. She never took anything that didn't belong to her. She never broke any laws or violated any rules. She simply observed and documented what was happening in plain sight. But she kept everything secret because she knew Judge Blackwell was powerful enough to destroy her career if he found out what she was doing. The problem was that Sarah didn't know what to do with all the evidence she had gathered. She was just a court reporter. Who would believe her word against a respected judge? Who would even listen to her accusations? Judge Blackwell had friends in high places who would protect him. Sarah thought about going to the police, but she knew that many police officers appeared before Judge Blackwell's court. They wouldn't want to make an enemy of such a powerful man. She thought about going to the newspapers, but she was afraid they would dismiss her as a disgruntled employee with a personal grudge. Sarah needed someone with legal training who could understand the evidence and know how to use it properly. She needed someone who had been personally wronged by Judge Blackwell and would be motivated to see justice done. She needed someone who wasn't afraid to fight powerful people. When Sarah saw Marcus Rodriguez being humiliated in Judge Blackwell's courtroom, she knew she had found the right person. Marcus was clearly honest and hardworking. He genuinely cared about his clients even though they couldn't pay him much money. He was willing to stand up to Judge Blackwell even when it meant destroying his own reputation. Most importantly, Marcus had nothing left to lose. His career was already ruined. Other judges were already treating him badly. He had hit rock bottom, which meant he could take risks that other lawyers couldn't afford to take. After watching Marcus lose his third case in a row, Sarah knew it was time to act. She couldn't let Judge Blackwell continue destroying innocent people's lives. She couldn't let honest lawyers like Marcus be driven out of the profession by corrupt judges. She had to find a way to give Marcus the evidence he needed to fight back. But Sarah had to be very careful. If Judge Blackwell discovered that she was the source of the evidence, her life would be ruined. She would lose her job and probably never work in the legal system again. Judge Blackwell might even find a way to have her arrested on false charges. Sarah decided to approach Marcus anonymously. She would give him the evidence without revealing who she was. That way, he could use it to expose Judge Blackwell's corruption without putting her in danger. Sarah spent several days planning exactly how to make contact with Marcus. She drove by his office several times to study the building and the surrounding area. She needed to find a way to get the evidence to him without being seen by anyone who might report back to Judge Blackwell. Finally, Sarah came up with a plan. She would wait until very late at night when the building was empty. She would slip the evidence under Marcus's office door along with a note explaining what it was. Marcus would find it the next morning and hopefully understand how important it was. On a cold Tuesday night, Sarah parked her car 3 blocks away from Marcus's office building. She wore dark clothes and a hat that covered her face. She carried a large envelope containing copies of all the evidence she had gathered over the past 3 years. Sarah's heart was beating fast as she walked to the building. She felt like a criminal, even though she was trying to expose real crimes. She kept looking over her shoulder to make sure no one was following her. The building was dark and quiet. The laundromat on the first floor was closed for the night. Sarah climbed the stairs to Marcus's office as quietly as possible. Every step seemed to echo in the empty hallway. When she reached Marcus's door, Sarah hesitated for a moment. Once she slid that envelope under the door, there would be no going back. Judge Blackwell's corruption would finally be exposed, but Sarah's safe, quiet life would be over forever. Sarah thought about her daughter Lisa, who was still struggling with injuries from the car accident. She thought about Mrs. Martinez and all the other innocent people who had been hurt by Judge Blackwell's greed. She thought about Marcus and how he was trying to help people despite being treated terribly by the system. Sarah knelt down and slid the envelope under Marcus's door. Inside the envelope was enough evidence to destroy Judge Blackwell's career and send him to prison. But more importantly, it was enough evidence to restore justice to a corrupt system and give hope to people who had lost faith in the law. As Sarah walked back to her car, she felt scared, but also relieved. For 3 years, she had carried the burden of knowing about Judge Blackwell's crimes while feeling powerless to stop them. Now she had finally done something about it. She had given an honest lawyer the tools he needed to fight back against corruption. Sarah didn't know if Marcus would understand the importance of what she had given him. She didn't know if he would have the courage to use the evidence against Such a powerful enemy. But she had done all she could do. The rest was up to Marcus Rodriguez. Marcus Rodriguez arrived at his office early the next morning, feeling tired and defeated. He had spent another sleepless night wondering if he should give up practicing law. The humiliation from Judge Blackwell still burned in his memory. His reputation was ruined, his clients were leaving him, and he could barely pay his rent. As Marcus climbed the stairs to his office, he noticed something different. There was a large manila envelope on the floor in front of his door. Someone had slipped it under the door during the night. There was no name or return address on the envelope, just the words, "Urgent, read immediately," written in block letters. Marcus picked up the envelope and unlocked his office door. He sat down at his desk and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were hundreds of pages of documents, photographs, and audio recordings. There was also a handwritten note that made his heart race. "Mr. Rodriguez," the note said, "Judge Blackwell has been taking bribes for years. The evidence is all here: photos, recordings, financial records, case files. He has stolen justice from hundreds of people, including your clients. You have the power to stop him. Be careful. He has powerful friends who will try to protect him. Trust no one except the FBI. A friend." Marcus spread the documents across his desk with shaking hands. What he saw made him sick to his stomach. There were photographs of Judge Blackwell meeting with lawyers in his chambers. In several photos, Marcus could clearly see envelopes and briefcases being exchanged. The lawyers in the photos represented some of the biggest companies and wealthiest families in the city. There were bank records showing that Judge Blackwell had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in suspicious payments over the past 5 years. The money came from shell companies and fake charities that were connected to the lawyers who appeared before his court. Judge Blackwell's lifestyle clearly exceeded what he could afford on his judicial salary. Marcus found audio recordings of conversations between Judge Blackwell and various lawyers. In one recording, he heard the judge promising to rule in favor of a real estate developer in exchange for $50,000. In another, he heard Judge Blackwell laughing about how he had ruled against a group of cancer patients who were suing a chemical company. The most shocking documents were the case files. Someone had carefully documented dozens of cases where Judge Blackwell had ruled unfairly. Poor plaintiffs with strong evidence lost their cases while wealthy defendants with weak arguments won theirs. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Marcus found his own cases in the files. There were notes explaining that Judge Blackwell had decided to rule against Mrs. Martinez before the hearing even started. The Pemberton family had made a large donation to one of Judge Blackwell's fake charities the week before the trial. The judge's cruel treatment of Marcus had been planned in advance to discourage other poor lawyers from challenging wealthy clients. As Marcus read through the evidence, his sadness and defeat turned into burning anger. Judge Blackwell hadn't just humiliated him. He had stolen justice from hundreds of innocent people. Workers who had been cheated by their bosses, patients who had been harmed by negligent doctors, families who had lost loved ones to drunk drivers, all of them had been denied justice because they couldn't afford to bribe a corrupt judge. Marcus realized that he had a choice to make. He could ignore the evidence and try to rebuild his career quietly. Or he could use the evidence to expose Judge Blackwell's corruption, knowing that it would make him even more enemies among the wealthy and powerful people who controlled the legal system. But for Marcus, there was really no choice at all. He had become a lawyer to fight for justice, not to stay quiet about injustice. This evidence was a gift that could help him restore faith in the legal system and get justice for all the people who had been wronged. Marcus knew he couldn't handle this alone. The note had mentioned the FBI, and Marcus realized that was the right place to start. Judge Blackwell's crimes were federal offenses that required federal investigation. Local prosecutors might be too afraid of Judge Blackwell's political connections to take action. Marcus called the FBI office and asked to speak to someone about public corruption. He was transferred to Agent Linda Walsh, who specialized in investigating corrupt government officials. When Marcus explained that he had evidence of judicial corruption, Agent Walsh agreed to meet with him that afternoon. Agent Walsh was a serious woman in her 40s who had been investigating corruption for over 10 years. She had seen many cases where people claimed to have evidence against judges, but most of the time the evidence was weak or unreliable. When Marcus walked into her office carrying several boxes of documents, she was skeptical, but interested. "Mr. Rodriguez," Agent Walsh said as she examined the first few documents, "where did you get all of this evidence?" "Someone left it at my office anonymously," Marcus explained. "I don't know who it was, but they obviously had access to Judge Blackwell's private activities for several years." Agent Walsh studied the photographs and bank records carefully. Her expression grew more serious as she realized how extensive the evidence was. "Mr. Rodriguez, if this evidence is authentic, we're looking at one of the biggest judicial corruption cases in the state's history. But I have to warn you, investigating a sitting judge is extremely dangerous. Judge Blackwell has powerful friends who will do anything to protect him." "I understand the risks," Marcus said, "but I can't let him continue destroying innocent people's lives. He humiliated me in court because I dared to represent a poor housekeeper against a wealthy family. How many other people has he hurt just because they couldn't afford to pay him bribes?" Agent Walsh was impressed by Marcus's courage and determination. She had seen many people who discovered corruption but were too afraid to come forward. Marcus was risking his career and possibly his safety to expose the truth. Over the next several weeks, Agent Walsh and her team began a careful investigation of Judge Blackwell. They verified the authenticity of the documents and recordings. They traced the money flows between Judge Blackwell and the lawyers who appeared before his court. They interviewed victims of his corrupt decisions and built a comprehensive case. Marcus worked closely with the FBI, helping them understand the legal aspects of the evidence. He explained how Judge Blackwell had violated judicial ethics and federal laws. He helped identify which cases should be reopened because they had been decided through corruption rather than justice. The investigation was dangerous and difficult. Judge Blackwell's supporters tried to interfere with the FBI's work. They spread rumors that Marcus was a disgruntled lawyer who was making false accusations because he had lost cases in Judge Blackwell's court. They tried to discredit the evidence by claiming it had been obtained illegally. But Agent Walsh and her team were experienced in handling these kinds of pressure tactics. They continued their investigation methodically and carefully. They gathered additional evidence from other sources. They found more victims who were willing to testify about Judge Blackwell's corruption. During the investigation, Marcus learned more disturbing facts about Judge Blackwell's crimes. The corrupt judge had not just taken bribes to influence his decisions. He had also helped wealthy criminals avoid punishment for serious crimes. He had covered up environmental damage that was making people sick. He had allowed dangerous products to stay on the market even when they were hurting children. Marcus realized that Judge Blackwell's corruption had affected thousands of people in ways they might never even know. A mother whose child was born with birth defects might not know that Judge Blackwell had dismissed her lawsuit against a chemical company in exchange for money. A worker who died from lung disease might not know that Judge Blackwell had prevented his family from getting compensation from his employer. The more Marcus learned about Judge Blackwell's crimes, the more determined he became to see justice done. This wasn't just about getting revenge for his own humiliation. This was about restoring integrity to the legal system and making sure that justice was available to everyone, not just people who could afford to pay bribes. As the investigation continued, Marcus started to receive threatening phone calls and emails. Anonymous voices warned him to stop cooperating with the FBI. They told him that he was making powerful enemies who could destroy his life. They suggested that he might have accidents if he continued to cause trouble, but Marcus refused to be intimidated. He had already lost his reputation and most of his clients because of Judge Blackwell's corruption. He had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain by seeing the investigation through to the end. Agent Walsh assured Marcus that the FBI would protect him from retaliation. She assigned agents to watch his office and apartment. She gave him a special phone number to call if he felt threatened. She made it clear that anyone who tried to harm Marcus would face federal charges. After 3 months of intensive investigation, Agent Walsh told Marcus that they were ready to take action. They had gathered enough evidence to prove that Judge Blackwell had committed multiple federal crimes. They had identified dozens of cases that had been decided through corruption. They had traced millions of dollars in illegal payments. "Mr. Rodriguez," Agent Walsh said, "Judge Harrison Blackwell was having a perfect morning." He sat in his expensive leather chair, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee from his favorite china cup. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of his luxurious chambers. Everything in his world was exactly as it should be. He had just finished hearing a case where he had ruled in favor of another wealthy client. The client's lawyer had made a generous donation to one of Judge Blackwell's fake charities the week before. It was another easy $50,000 for the judge's personal accounts. Life was good when you knew how to work the system. Judge Blackwell was planning his family's summer vacation to Europe. His wife wanted to spend a month in Italy, staying in the most expensive hotels and eating at the finest restaurants. His children wanted to go shopping in Paris and London. The judge could afford all of it thanks to the steady stream of bribes that flowed into his bank accounts. At exactly 10:30 in the morning, there was a loud knock on Judge Blackwell's chamber door. Before he could answer, the door burst open. 6 FBI agents in dark suits entered the room, followed by Agent Linda Walsh. Judge Blackwell nearly dropped his coffee cup in shock. "Judge Harrison Blackwell," Agent Walsh said in a clear, strong voice, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and violation of your civil rights oath under federal law." Judge Blackwell's face turned white. His hands began to shake. For 20 years, he had been the most powerful person in his courtroom. Everyone stood up when he entered. Everyone spoke to him with respect and fear. Now, suddenly, he was just another criminal being arrested by federal agents. "This is ridiculous," Judge Blackwell stammered, trying to sound authoritative. "I am a respected judge. You cannot just barge into my chambers like this. I have rights." Agent Walsh pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Judge Blackwell, we have extensive evidence of your criminal activities. Bank records showing illegal payments, photographs of you accepting bribes, audio recordings of you promising to fix cases in exchange for money. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it." As the agents handcuffed Judge Blackwell, he looked around his chambers desperately. All the expensive furniture, the fancy artwork, the symbols of his power and success, they meant nothing now. He was just another criminal being led away in handcuffs. The news of Judge Blackwell's arrest spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, and court reporters gathered in the hallways, whispering in shock and excitement. Many of them had suspected that something was wrong with Judge Blackwell, but they had never imagined the corruption was so extensive. Marcus Rodriguez was in his office when Agent Walsh called to tell him about the arrest. He had been waiting for this moment for months, but he still couldn't believe it was really happening. The corrupt judge who had humiliated him and destroyed his reputation was finally facing justice. "Mr. Rodriguez," Agent Walsh said over the phone, "Judge Blackwell is in federal custody. We executed search warrants on his home, his bank accounts, and his private office. We found even more evidence of corruption. This case is going to be bigger than we originally thought." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. For months, he had been working with the FBI to build the case against Judge Blackwell. He had provided legal expertise, helped interview victims, and testified before the grand jury. Now all that work was paying off. The search of Judge Blackwell's mansion revealed the extent of his corruption. Federal agents found stacks of cash hidden in secret safes. They discovered expensive jewelry, artwork, and other luxury items that Judge Blackwell could never have afforded on his judicial salary. They seized computers and documents that provided even more evidence of criminal activity. Judge Blackwell's wife and children were shocked to learn about his crimes. They had enjoyed their luxurious lifestyle without asking where the money came from. His wife had assumed that Judge Blackwell was just good at investing in the stock market. His children thought their father was successful because he was smart and hardworking. Now they realized that their comfortable life had been built on corruption and injustice. The mansion, the expensive cars, the private school tuition, the European vacations, all of it had been paid for with money that Judge Blackwell had stolen from the people who trusted him to provide fair justice. The federal prosecutors assigned to the case were amazed by the amount of evidence. They had bank records showing that Judge Blackwell had received over $2 million in bribes during his career. They had documentation of more than 100 cases where he had ruled unfairly in exchange for money. Marcus worked closely with the prosecutors to help them understand the legal implications of Judge Blackwell's crimes. He explained how each corrupt decision had violated federal law and denied constitutional rights to the victims. He helped identify which cases should be reopened so that justice could finally be served. The grand jury that heard the evidence against Judge Blackwell was shocked by the scope of his corruption. After hearing testimony from Marcus, Agent Walsh, and dozens of victims, they returned indictments on 37 separate federal charges. Each charge carried a potential sentence of several years in prison. When Judge Blackwell's trial began, 6 months later, the courthouse was packed with reporters, lawyers, and members of the public. Many people came to see the corrupt judge finally face justice. Others came to support the victims of his crimes. Marcus was one of the key witnesses in the trial. He testified about how Judge Blackwell had humiliated him in court and ruled unfairly against his clients. He explained how the judge's corruption had damaged the integrity of the entire legal system. He spoke clearly and confidently, knowing that he was finally getting the chance to tell the truth about what had happened. Judge Blackwell's defense lawyers tried to claim that he was innocent of all charges. They argued that the evidence had been obtained illegally and should not be allowed in court. They suggested that Marcus and the other witnesses were lying because they were angry about losing cases. But the evidence against Judge Blackwell was overwhelming. The prosecutors played audio recordings of him promising to fix cases in exchange for money. They showed photographs of him accepting envelopes full of cash from lawyers. They presented bank records that proved he had received millions of dollars in illegal payments. The victims of Judge Blackwell's corruption also testified at the trial. Mrs. Martinez, the housekeeper who had been wrongfully fired, told the jury how the judge had refused to consider evidence that proved her innocence. Cancer patients explained how Judge Blackwell had dismissed their lawsuits against chemical companies that had made them sick. Accident victims described how the judge had ruled in favor of drunk drivers and negligent companies. Each victim's story showed how Judge Blackwell's corruption had real consequences for real people. He hadn't just taken money. He had denied justice to hundreds of innocent people who deserved better from their legal system. During his testimony, Marcus looked directly at Judge Blackwell for the first time since that humiliating day in court. The judge looked older and smaller than Marcus remembered. He was no longer wearing expensive suits or sitting on a high bench looking down at everyone else. He was just a criminal defendant, sitting at a table with his lawyers, facing the consequences of his actions. Judge Blackwell never took the stand to testify in his own defense. His lawyers knew that he would be destroyed by cross-examination. There was too much evidence against him, and he had no reasonable explanation for how he had afforded his luxurious lifestyle on a judge's salary. The trial lasted for 3 weeks. When it was over, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 37 charges. Judge Blackwell showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his wife and children were crying in the gallery. At the sentencing hearing 2 months later, Marcus was allowed to give a victim impact statement. He spoke about how Judge Blackwell's corruption had damaged not just individual victims but the entire justice system. "Your Honor," Marcus said to the federal judge who was sentencing Judge Blackwell, "this defendant didn't just take bribes. He sold justice to the highest bidder. He made poor people believe that the law would never protect them. He convinced wealthy people that they could buy their way out of any legal problem. He damaged the faith that people have in our courts and our democracy." The federal judge sentenced Judge Blackwell to 15 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay over $3 million in restitution to his victims and to forfeit all the property he had bought with illegal money. As Judge Blackwell was led away in shackles, Marcus felt a sense of closure that he had never expected. The corrupt judge who had humiliated him and destroyed his reputation was finally facing justice. But more importantly, the legal system had been cleansed of a cancer that had been poisoning it for years. That night, Marcus went home to his small apartment and called Mrs. Martinez. Her case along with dozens of others, would be reopened and reheard by honest judges. She would finally get the justice that Judge Blackwell had denied her. "Mr. Rodriguez," Mrs. Martinez said through tears of joy, "I never thought this day would come. Thank you for not giving up." 1 year after Judge Blackwell's sentencing, Marcus Rodriguez stood in his new office on the 15th floor of a downtown building. The view from his window showed the entire city spread out below him. It was a far cry from the cramped room, above the laundromat where his journey had begun. The phone on his desk rang constantly. Reporters wanted to interview him about the corruption case. Other lawyers wanted to refer clients to him. Law schools wanted him to speak to their students about ethics and justice. Marcus Rodriguez had become one of the most respected lawyers in the state. But Marcus had not forgotten where he came from or why he had become a lawyer in the first place. His new law firm, Rodriguez and Associates, specialized in helping people who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. The difference was that now Marcus had the resources and reputation to fight for them effectively. The money from Judge Blackwell's seized assets had been used to create the Justice Foundation, a non-profit organization that helped victims of corruption and provided legal services to poor people. Marcus served as the foundation's president, overseeing programs that made sure everyone had access to fair legal representation. Mrs. Rosa Martinez was one of the first beneficiaries of the foundation's work. Her case had been reopened and heard by an honest judge who ruled in her favor. She received not only her missing wages but also additional compensation for the suffering she had endured. The money allowed her to buy a small house for her family and send her children to better schools. "Mr. Rodriguez," Mrs. Martinez said when she visited his new office, "I never dreamed that fighting for my wages would lead to all this. You saved, not just me, but hundreds of other people who were being cheated by that corrupt judge." Marcus smiled as he looked at the framed newspaper articles on his wall. The headlines told the story of Judge Blackwell's downfall. Corrupt judge sentenced to 15 years. FBI uncovers massive bribery scheme. Poor lawyer brings down powerful judge. But the headline that meant the most to Marcus was a smaller one. All cases ruled by corrupt judge to be reviewed. Over 100 cases that had been decided by Judge Blackwell were being reopened and reheard by honest judges. Families who had been denied justice for years were finally getting their day in court. Workers who had been cheated by their employers were receiving compensation. Accident victims were getting money for their medical bills. Environmental damage was being cleaned up at the expense of the companies that had caused it. The ripple effects of Judge Blackwell's downfall extended far beyond his own courtroom. The scandal had led to investigations of other judges and court officials. New rules were put in place to prevent judicial corruption. The entire legal system was being reformed to make sure that what happened with Judge Blackwell could never happen again. Marcus received a visit from Agent Linda Walsh, who had led the FBI investigation. She brought news that several other corrupt officials had been arrested based on evidence discovered during the Blackwell investigation. "Mr. Rodriguez," Agent Walsh said, "when you first came to my office with that evidence, I knew it was important, but I never imagined it would lead to the biggest corruption cleanup in the state's history. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." Marcus was proud, but he was also humbled by how much work remained to be done. Every day he received calls from people who needed help fighting injustice. Poor families facing eviction, workers being cheated by their bosses, immigrants being threatened by employers, patients harmed by negligent doctors. The need for honest legal representation never ended. The success of his case against Judge Blackwell had brought Marcus offers from some of the biggest law firms in the country. They wanted to hire him as a partner and pay him millions of dollars a year. But Marcus had turned them all down. He preferred working for people who really needed his help, not wealthy corporations that could afford any lawyer they wanted. Marcus's old law school invited him to speak at their graduation ceremony. Standing at the podium where he had once sat as a struggling student, Marcus looked out at the young faces of the new lawyers about to enter the profession. "Many of you will be tempted to chase money and prestige," Marcus told the graduates. "You'll want to work for big firms and represent wealthy clients. There's nothing wrong with success, but don't forget why you became lawyers in the first place. The law exists to protect people who can't protect themselves. Justice means nothing if it's only available to people who can afford it. Marcus told them about his own journey from a small office above a laundromat to exposing one of the biggest corruption scandals in the state's history. He explained that his success had come not from compromising his values, but from standing firm in his commitment to justice. When Judge Blackwell humiliated me in his courtroom, I thought my career was over, Marcus said. I thought I had failed my clients and myself. But sometimes our darkest moments lead to our greatest opportunities. The judge thought he was destroying me, but he was actually setting in motion the events that would destroy him. After the speech, many students approached Marcus to ask for advice. Some wanted to know how to succeed in the legal profession. Others wanted to know how to fight corruption and injustice. Marcus gave them all the same advice. Work hard, stay honest, and never give up on the people who need your help the most. Sarah Chen, the court reporter who had secretly gathered evidence against Judge Blackwell, also visited Marcus's new office. She had been worried that her role in exposing the corruption would hurt her career, but the opposite had happened. She was now recognized as a hero who had risked her job to expose the truth. "Mr. Rodriguez," Sarah said, "I watched Judge Blackwell destroy so many innocent people over the years. I felt helpless because I was just a court reporter. But when I saw how he treated you, I knew I had found someone who would have the courage to use the evidence I had gathered." Sarah had received a commendation from the FBI and a promotion within the court system. She was now training other court reporters to recognize and report signs of corruption. Her daughter Lisa had also benefited from the case being reopened. She finally received compensation for her injuries from the car accident. Marcus often thought about the anonymous note that had started everything. "You have the power to stop him." At the time, Marcus had felt powerless and defeated. But the note had been right. He did have the power to stop Judge Blackwell's corruption. He just hadn't known it yet. The irony was not lost on Marcus that Judge Blackwell's arrogance had been his own downfall. If the corrupt judge had simply ruled against Mrs. Martinez quietly, without the public humiliation, Marcus might never have become motivated enough to pursue the case when the evidence was delivered to him. Judge Blackwell's need to prove his power had ultimately led to his destruction. Marcus received a letter from Judge Blackwell in federal prison. The former judge wanted to apologize and ask for forgiveness. In the letter, Judge Blackwell wrote that he had started taking bribes to help his family, but that greed had taken over his life. He said he was sorry for all the people he had hurt. Marcus read the letter several times before deciding how to respond. He wrote back to Judge Blackwell, not to forgive him but to explain how his actions had affected real people's lives. Marcus included stories from some of the victims whose cases were being reopened. He wanted Judge Blackwell to understand the full impact of his corruption. "Judge Blackwell," Marcus wrote, "you didn't just take money. You stole hope from people who believed in justice. You made them think that the system would never work for people like them. Some of those people gave up fighting for their rights because of what you did to them. That's the real crime you committed." Marcus never received a response to his letter, but he hoped that Judge Blackwell would spend his time in prison thinking about the damage he had caused and finding ways to make amends for his crimes. The most rewarding part of Marcus's new success was seeing how it inspired other young lawyers. Many recent law school graduates came to work for his firm, choosing to help poor and working-class clients instead of chasing big corporate salaries. They had learned from Marcus's example that doing the right thing could lead to both professional success and personal satisfaction. Marcus also established a scholarship program for law students from poor families. He remembered how difficult it had been to afford law school, and how the wealthy students had advantages that he never had. The scholarship program helped level the playing field and ensured that talent, not family wealth, determined who could become a lawyer. 5 years after Judge Blackwell's conviction, Marcus was invited to the White House to receive a national award for public service. The president praised him for exposing corruption and fighting for justice. Standing in the Oval Office, Marcus thought about the long journey from his small office above the laundromat to this moment of national recognition. But the award that meant the most to Marcus came from an unexpected source. The local bar association, which had once looked down on him because of his background and cheap suits, presented him with their highest honor for ethical conduct. Many of the same lawyers who had laughed at Judge Blackwell's jokes about Marcus now stood and applauded as he received the award. In his acceptance speech,